Would you consider this treatment? So it's cost-free. It is actually rather enjoyable, and it's something you already know how to do. And the effects of this treatment are as follows: improved energy, improved physical performance, weight loss, improved learning and memory, improved cognitive performance, and improved mood. Would you like to try that? Well, that treatment or that intervention, that protocol is sleep. And I heard that intro from a talk, I believe it was a talk from Matthew Walker, who's a renowned sleep scientist. And I thought, isn't that a great introduction? Because in this talk, I'm going to offer a similar prescription or a similar treatment, but that is in the form of reduced work hours. Again, it's cost-free, something that we can all do readily, and it has a lot of benefits to our mental and physical health and overall well-being. So that's what this video is about. My name's Jackson. I'm a partner at Happiness Means Business. We work at the intersection of workplace and well-being. And I'm also a director at work4.org, the leading U.S. Advocacy nonprofit for the 4-day workweek. And this video is really about the relationship between reduced work hours initiatives like the 4-day workweek and happiness and well-being. And as I'll talk about, I don't mean just individual happiness and well-being, but thinking to the broader context of where we're at in the present moment with our various, I think fair to say, mental health crises. And even the U.S. Surgeon General has made some public health advisories to that effect. So this is really a pivotal moment to explore this relationship for how we can improve happiness and well-being, not only for individuals, but at the level of society. So thinking about work hours, what am I talking about here? Well, really it's just the amount of time you are engaging in work. And it's often more than the 40 hours label that we give it, because you've probably experienced what I call work bleed, which is how work more and more, and I think this is a product of both technology and our hustle culture, right, is bleeding more and more into other areas of life. So it's like maybe I'm done at 6 o'clock, but it's 7:30 and I'm at dinner with my family and we're waiting on food and I'm, checking my email, right? Like this is a common experience. So when we think about work hours, it's not saying that you shouldn't work hard. It's not saying that, we're going to stop showing up, and it's not saying you shouldn't be equally effective. It's simply thinking about what is the amount of time you are cognitively engaging in work. Let's talk about happiness and well-being. Well, this refers to really two levels for two groups, right? The first level I would say is mental and physical health, right? So the basics, the foundation, and then you get into more life satisfaction or quality of life. And then there's two groups, right? There's individual level and then societal level, the level of a country or really a global well-being in a sense. So we're going to talk about the relationship between both of those. And let's start with upfront. I think we need to address this as kind of a prerequisite is, how does this reduced work hours initiative such as the 4-day work week impact productivity and business performance? Because I think we can all agree that it's essential to prioritize mental and physical health, but we also have to think about the economic realities of business performance, of stakeholders, etc. And I'll hit on this just briefly, but there's an Economist article that I was reading that said in the UK, for instance, the average knowledge worker is productive for 2.5 hours per day. Now, if you're Canadian watching this, and my business partner's Canadian, so he might like this, the number was 1.5 hours per day. And this maybe sounds crazy up front, and of course, this is going to vary from context to context, individual to individual. I'm sure you're more productive than that. But when you really think about how the office tends to work, right? You go in, you get coffee, you stop for a chat, you sit down to work, you do a couple emails, someone taps you on the shoulder, you get distracted, you get pulled into something, right? Then you come back and you're finally ready to get into this big project, and you've got 5 30-minute meetings in a row, right? And then you're done, and when you're done, you see you got a missed call from someone in the family, and so you got to take that, and then you get back done, and you're about ready to go, and you got lunch, and you get the idea. So it's simply saying that there is a nonlinear relationship between time spent and tangible business outcomes, particularly for knowledge workers. And I'll repeat that one more time, right? So if you are putting boxes on into a truck, there's a fairly linear relationship between the amount of time you work and the amount of outcomes you produce. For knowledge workers, on the other hand, particularly in administrative settings or highly creative settings, there is a far less linear inputs to outputs relationship, right? You might be working for several hours, but you have one breakthrough conversation or one aha insight in your analysis that leads to the tangible business objective, okay? So that's the important thing to understand. Now, as we get into the results from the various pilots now, there have been several hundred companies now, thousands of employees across 6 continents. What we tend to find is that productivity is either the same or slightly improved following reduced work hours. And I think it's important to point out that these pilot results were 4-day work weeks, but they weren't always like a hard and fast Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. Right? They could have just been a 15% reduction in hours for 100% of prior compensation. So we find, again, that productivity is either unchanged or improved. You look at revenue. So thinking about the last couple pilots, what they saw is that revenue actually increased compared to a comparable period in the year prior. Now, if you're skeptical, I get it. It's like macroeconomic factors that can drive that. But at the very least, it's suffice to say that the reduced work hours did not hinder revenue growth, right? They didn't hinder business performance. And of course, there was a host of benefits to employees, some of which I'll touch on, but the general consensus from this rigorous and fairly large sample size now from multiple pilots is just that businesses, in terms of their performance, were either neutral impact or positive impact in terms of overall effectiveness and performance. And if you don't believe me, you can look up all the various pilots, but I don't have time for that in this talk, because I want to focus this talk a little bit more on the connection, as I said, to happiness and well-being. So I'm going to just reference one study here that was done by the World Health Organization. And they did some analysis here, right, where they looked at hours and how hours related to heart disease and stroke. What they found was that people who worked over 55 hours were at a 35% higher likelihood of suffering from a stroke, 17% higher likelihood of heart disease, right? In these contexts, those being fatal. And so by their analysis, in one single year, 745,000 people die due to overwork. I'll say that again. 745,000 people die due to overwork. So we can see right here, World Health Organization, right? A direct tie between work and work hours and our physical health. And I want to take a level beyond there. We'll move now into thinking about mental health. Now, I'm not going to get into any particular study here. I think there's general, fairly well-supported scientific consensus in the literature that stress is damaging to our mental health. And I think if you think about it for more than 4 seconds, you'll probably get it, right? It's, stress it makes us anxious. It kind of makes us distressed. It often reduces our self-efficacy, which is our ability, sort of our autonomy or our capacity to engage in health-promoting behaviors that require discipline. So, right, stress, not great for mental health. And I want to, again, tie it back to also physical health here. So if you look at stress, right, what we tend to think of as not something physical, just mental, it actually affects the body, right, very significantly. So there's something called the HPA axis, which is part of the brain connecting to the nervous system that kind of regulates psychological stress and passes it into the physical nervous system. And you can actually see that high stress environments are damaging to cells, right? On the cellular level, you have reduced telomere length. Without going full nerd here, that's something that's often associated with aging, right? Or kind of acute damage to cells where the telomeres that contain the DNA are shortened, right? It's essentially like scratching a record or something. It's disrupting cell function, right? And when you think about cell function here, great book called Brain Energy, but you can look at a psychiatrist from Harvard, talks about how all mental disorders are metabolic disorders because they're irregularities or dysfunctions with brain energy. Because despite being a very small percentage of the body's weight, the brain consumes a high percentage of the body's calories. And so I share all that to say what's happening is when you disrupt cell function and cell metabolism, you're kind of messing with or disrupting brain energy, okay? Which then directly passes into mental health, right? So there's this huge kind of web effect going on where you have, right, we said stressors affecting our physiology, right? We had the study from the World Health Organization, but I also just talked about how through the HPA axis, right, the body is actually holding and responding to that stress, even if it feels like it's just mental stress. And then that at the cellular level is being translated back into mental health in terms of how it can disrupt or even just, disturb slightly some of our metabolic function and that brain energy. So what I mean to share by all that is hopefully you're a little bit nerdy like me, but it's also creating a very direct line between, right, I talked about two levels, how overwork, right, which I think we can all understand how that increased work hours, right, kind of produces more stress, how that ties directly to physical and mental health. Now let's get into that second level, right? A little bit more about actual just happiness, life satisfaction. And there's a few studies. I'll just run through them one at a time rather quickly, but they're all pretty interesting. Kasser and Sheldon have a paper that is titled Time Affluence as a Path to Personal Happiness and Ethical Business Practice. And I may have gotten one or two words off there, but you get the gist. And in that, they essentially look at how time affluence, which is a feeling of time wealth, right? Financial affluence would be like financial wealth. How time wealth is positively related to subjective well-being. And in my words, right, they essentially kind of in this paper, they look at several studies and they kind of suggest that, almost thinking in terms of compensation, in terms of time as opposed to finance, right, can be beneficial to individuals' well-being. And so that's not to say that money doesn't matter. It's very clear in the literature that financial scarcity or financial insecurity is a major stressor, but that once you have enough, that as employees, but also as employers, you may want to consider opportunities to increase time wealth as opposed to financial wealth as a mechanism to support well-being. Okay. Another paper comes from Ashley Whillans. And this paper is about how prioritizing time versus money affects your happiness. She had a brilliant experimental design for this. She had college students in their senior year, and they would answer questions that kind of categorize them as, are you a time prioritizer or a money prioritizer? And then she looked at them 1 year later, because presumably as seniors in college, you're making a big life transition, a big life decision there about what's your first job going to be. Well, when you go back a year later, those who prioritized time over money were much happier than the group that prioritized money over time. Right? So what you see there again is that when you're thinking about the trade-offs here, right, of prioritizing time or money, you're thinking about this reduced work hours concept, right, that may be something that is beneficial as it shows up in your decision making in terms of improving your overall quality of life. And now the third place we can look is the actual pilots themselves. And I'll just talk quickly about the UK pilot. This had about 2,900 employees. And I'll just pick this one, but this sort of squares with the results we see in the many other pilots across the globe. 41% of employees reported less stress, 71% less burnout. 40% said their mental health improved, another 40% said physical health improved, and about 35% said they had better sleep, which, again, second order consequences kind of feeds back into mental and physical health. So again, we see, right, that the pilots here are kind of another experiment where we say, what are the actual consequences of reduced work hours? And we see improved reports of mental and physical health overall quality of life. And I think it was something in there that I loved this little bit was that 15% of employees said that there was no amount of money they could be paid to go back to the 5-day week. So tying this all together, right? We talked here about how this connection is, I would say, fairly strongly supported at this point from both the research from the pilots, right, that are sort of natural experiments here, and then the scientific literature as a whole saying that there's a relationship here that needs to be investigated between work hours and happiness and well-being. And particularly, I believe now there's more and more evidence to suggest that reduced work hours is a pathway to both individual and societal flourishing, because we talked about how it can promote, right, improved physical health, improved mental health, but then, again, several studies here that's also just more broadly speaking, that time over the money is really what matters for how happy you are in your life satisfaction. So when we think about our current moment, right, the Surgeon General in 2022 published a briefing on mental health in the workplace, essentially arguing and encouraging workplaces, reminding them that they are a key pillar in the mental health of everyone in society. We look at the Surgeon General Public Health Advisory around loneliness and isolation and mental health, where we continue to see mental disorders, even chronic physical illnesses in many cases on the rise, acts of violence and kind of mental health crises, incarcerations continuing to rise. So in our present moment, we need to really investigate, I believe, as individuals, but also as employers, as workplaces, and our political institutions in some cases. What are the pathways that really support happiness and well-being? And I believe that an essential pathway to consider is changing our relationship to work. Above all else, saying, why don't we work to live instead of live to work? And I believe that that line of thought will improve both our individual happiness and well-being and the happiness and well-being for all. So I hope you enjoyed this talk. If you want more resources on any of these subjects, please do reach out. I'm here for you, and thanks for watching.